But
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast with me today, JP. I am lucky enough to be interviewing JoDee Coulter from Ohio, all around moving through grief. So, first of all, thank you for doing this for us today, JoDee, and welcome.
of course, thank you. It's nice to be here.
And I guess our first question really for you is I know that you have been working in this field for many years. I know that you started out life as a music therapist. I know that you've got your own personal journey of loss along the way. And I also know more recently that you've taken personal training and nutrition qualifications. So it's an interesting combination of qualifications that you have. And now you speak at conferences and on podcasts about this whole kind of bereavement thing. How how do we find ourselves here where you're talking to me about this topic, which I know you're passionate about? How did it all start for you? Because I know you started out in music therapy, but then you also have had these series of losses. And anyway, I'll shut up and I'll let you explain about your own life.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. This is really wonderful, and this is a topic that is so near and dear to my heart. I think people think of grief, and they think it's a heavy, hard subject, and it can be, but I think, like we've said in previous conversation, it affects all of us. So I worked in the healthcare field for many, many years and came to work at a hospice as a music therapist and transitioned into this role of bereavement. And I really felt like it was a place of home for me, a place I really understood, getting to meet with families and support them in their grief as after they've lost someone, but also in my personal life. And having a true understanding of grief when my husband was diagnosed with a rare neuromuscular disease, just 3 years after we were married, and it changed our life forever. I went through a lot of challenges myself with panic and anxiety, not understanding that what I was really experiencing was grief and what I call the quiet sorrows. And all of these experiences in my life, with his disease and as it's progressed, and then losing my mother, all of those have just really made me understand how grief affects us even more. Having lived it, gone through the journeys that I've supported other people through that I thought I understood, and then the light bulb was like, you never know until you go through it. So now I just really want people to have an understanding of how it affects us because it affects all of us so incredibly differently. So let's hear here we
A
are.
lot there. So
Yeah.
break it down a little bit more for me, Jody, because I mean, when I first heard your story, it was so, oh my goodness. So there's so much loss there,
Yeah.
and it made me wonder how you were upright and walking and talking, let alone doing what you do now. So
Yeah.
take me back a little bit and take us back, I should say, and tell everyone the losses that you've experienced along the way, because I think there was someone once said to me they wanted to teach a course with me, but they only wanted to do this course with me because I had skin in the game. This idea that I'd
Mhm.
experienced what they'd experienced, as well as had knowledge to offer. And oh my goodness, you've got skin in the game.
Yeah. Well, when my husband was diagnosed, we had a little boy. He was 3 years old. He's now 29, getting married. Um, but 3 years into our marriage, he started falling and having a difficult time, like carrying our son on his back and riding his bike. And I kept saying, you need to get to the gym. You need to work out more. Like something's just not right. Well, then his brother started having a difficult time at work. He had to actually quit his job because he couldn't do his job. And after a year of testing, He was diagnosed with this Kennedy's disease, spinal bulbar muscular atrophy. And I know in the UK, there's a wonderful support system for Kennedy's disease, as there is in Australia. And we were all just together in Orlando just a few weeks ago. So it's pretty cool that people from around the world are coming together trying to understand this disease. But at the time, in 1998, there were 5 people in the state of Ohio, and 3 of them they were my husband and his 2 brothers. There was so little that was known about this disease. So I'm panicked, like, what is our life going to be like? I wanted to have a huge family. And then I find out that I have the gift of one son because that is the only child I'm going to be able to have. This disease changed how we live our life, where we live our life. We started out together biking, hiking, camping. He taught me to cross country ski. He taught me how to mountain climb. He taught me what to put in my bag and what to eat. And, as we'd go out into the wilderness, like he was Mr. Wilderness. He taught me how to dress. He took me up in the mountains. And to come to realize that what is this future going to be like? Because there were so many unknowns. And I started having panic and anxiety attacks that were just debilitating, completely debilitating. My mother had to come and stay with me. I couldn't go into grocery stores. I'd walk in the store and I'd put things down and run out the door and go, somebody else has got to go in there and buy that because I can't do that. I could go to my job, I could do my work, but getting from point A to point B about exhausted me for the day because it was driving that was so hard. Throw into the mix of that, I was a caregiver for my great uncle at the same time, and I started to develop increasingly more problematic back issues that, fast forward to 2010, became so debilitating I could barely walk and was scheduled for surgery. So after about 2 years of living with this horrible, horrible back pain, I would get out of bed and hang onto the walls. I would hang onto counters, anything to relieve the pain in my back. I figured if my feet don't touch the ground, I won't have that compression in my spine. So fast forward to a time when it was truly just the power of prayer, people praying over me. I realized this pain was gone. I still had the numbness, the tingling, and all the sensations, and I still wasn't walking straight. And I realized how I compensated. My hips were shifted, my knees were always bent, and I literally spent 6 months just trying to stand tall and engage my core because I couldn't do that. So after a couple years of doing that and getting back into exercise, in that time with my back issues, I gained a lot of weight. So I got focused on my own health and I lost 50 pounds. I started doing exercises at home and modifying to meet my needs. And as the time went on and I ended up losing that 50 pounds, I decided to become a personal trainer because I figured other people have this issue. Like I have an understanding. I lost the 50 pounds. I went through the stress. I was in my 50s. I wasn't a young girl anymore. And now I have the strongest core. I always tell everybody, my core is so strong. You just walk on my abs. I am not going to allow that to stop me again, to let my body become weak. In the process of that, back in 2016, probably one of the hardest things I've experienced was the death of my mom. So I went from the grief of a diagnosis and every little loss that came along the way. My husband is now in a wheelchair. Um, I do most everything around my house. And so it's a different kind of loss. The death of my mom took my breath away, pulled the rug out from under me, and changed my life forever, even in a different kind of way. And it was through that time that I was on this journey to lose my weight and get fit. And that is what helped me get to the other side. I just kept moving. It was 30 minutes of the day where I didn't have to think about my heart aching. I just had to focus on how my body was moving and pay attention that I was doing something that wouldn't hurt my back. So I had all these little things I was focusing on. And I didn't want to get to the other side. And I share this with my grievers. Keep yourself moving because you don't want to get to the other side, you know, in a worse position than you are today. We tend to get more sick. We're more accident prone because we're very clumsy. Our immune system is challenged when we're grieving. And if you keep yourself healthy, eating well, and keeping your body moving, when you get to the other side of your grief, where you finally reached a place of acceptance and okayness, we'll just call it okayness because you always grieve, right? You haven't gained weight and not taken care of yourself. So then you have something else to grieve on the other end, right? So I made sure, I was like, I'm not going to let this, not going to let this take away my health. I've worked too hard to be here. So I just kept myself moving through my grief. It really helped me process my grief of my mom and the death of her. And it's kept me strong to deal with what I have to deal with my husband. He is much more confident in the fact that I am healthy and strong rather than not taking care of myself, especially when he was able-bodied and, able to transfer. He would fall a lot. It was me. He's 6'1" and I'm 5 foot, almost 3. So, so I had to be sure that I was taking care of myself so that I could help him. And even still, I have to transfer him. He can't do anything on his own as far as movement, except in his chair and in a swimming pool. So that's kind of what brought me here. And I think those things have opened my eyes to the world of grief and movement in very different ways. And I see this little braid. I'm a caregiver. I like to support caregivers and encourage them, whether they're personal or professional, and taking care of themselves. And I see the grief piece and I see the fitness and the nutrition piece. And they all are so important to keep ourselves healthy. And I think a lot of times in the movement industry, we're there to get somebody moving. And yes, we'll talk about moving and, making sure they're getting their workout in and all of that. But what's going on at home? Do we check in? How are we checking in? And where's their energy and what do they need that day? So I really think it's opened my eyes to a whole new world. Yeah.
I mean, and it's how we connected is through that whole premise of everything being connected in that way. I mean, you've given us some of the story there, but I'm right in thinking that you've lost your mum, as have I. You had a series of losses among your family relatively close together. Am I right in remembering that correctly?
Yes. Well, I always talk about grief having tangible and intangible losses, and that grief isn't always about death. So, my husband had lost his job. His health started to decline. My uncle I was caring for had to move into a nursing home, and I had to explain this to him, what was going to be happening in his life and how he was going to be, you know, his life was now consist of the little clothes he can fit in his closet, and going through his socks, and at that same time, my mother had her stroke and died 3 days later. At that same time, my son was graduating from college and he moved away, farther away than he already was. And then 8 months later, my uncle died. So in that 8 months time, my husband lost his job, his health declined. My mother died after 3 days after a stroke. I had to move my uncle, I had to move my son. And at the same time, every day I went to work and supported grievers. So I would go into work, listen to their story, and sometimes the story coming back to me was my story. It was about their mom or their dad, but it was exactly my story. And that can take a lot of energy out of you. So coming home and trying to take care of myself at the end of a day was really imperative so that I could go back and do what I did every day, because a lot of times people think you see a big family and, oh, they've got so much support and everybody's
Mm.
there for them. But that's not always how it is. People saw me as the strong one. They didn't reach out to help me. They figured JoDee knows grief. She's fine. But I really, really wasn't. I was really, really struggling because they didn't know about my husband's health and the job and my uncle dying. And they didn't know all that was happening behind the scenes. So we can't look at somebody for face value and think that they have lost I say just, they've lost someone they love. They've lost a lot of things. And we've talked about secondary losses. There was a lot that came along with the loss of my husband's health and the loss of my mom and the loss of my uncle. Lots of challenges and my
And I
son moving
think
away.
we've also, shared in the past, like this whole thing of you that first 3 or 4 weeks, lots of people are reaching out during a crisis, aren't they? And
Yes.
and I think the message that I really received loud and clear from you was keep checking in, because after the 3 or 4 weeks, everyone drifts away because, well, the crisis is over, the loss has happened or the news has been delivered. Um, and ironically, I'm one of those people that I will send my regards at the event, but I'll know that they're inundated at that point. I actually wait a month before I reach out with really meaningful kind of, so how are things going? Did you want to go for a walk? And those kind of things. It's that keep checking in. And even if you don't get anything back, do it again anyway. I mean, is that a kind of like a good system?
That is absolutely a perfect system. That is
Yeah.
absolutely a perfect system because you're right. We can do anything for a short time, I always say. So, like, um, when someone dies, when I'm working in bereavement in my job, I will call a family member, ask them how they're doing, and they're like, I'm great. I have my church, I have my friends, I have my family. My kids are checking in on me every day. But after that 3, 4 weeks, they start to go back to their life being busy. And I just had a conversation like this the other day. The At that time, that fog just kind of lifts for them, and they start seeing like, whoa, this is really real. It's like you're peeking through your curtain, going, whoa, I don't want to go out there. I don't want to go out there. And then all of a sudden their feelings start to bubble up. They start to feel sick. They start to be maybe more tearful, more anxious of going and doing things. And so it's like that 3 to 4 weeks, everybody goes back to being busy. And it's a natural thing to do, right? And then that 3 to 4 months comes, and that's when everybody's kind of gone. And then 3 to 7 months, I call it the kicking and screaming phase. So we think that because someone has died and their loved ones have gone through the funeral and everything's good, they might walk into our clinic, into our office, and we think, okay, yeah, they're doing good. Look, they're smiling. But on the inside, they're going home and they're crying behind the doors. They're not letting people know because they think, well, people think I should be over this. So we set our expectations on the judgment of others. And it's that 3 to 7 months, that kicking and screaming phase. We're like, I don't want to do this anymore. It was okay for like 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 3 months. I was okay. But this is getting ridiculous. I still feel like I got punched in the gut. I don't like feeling this way anymore. And so they start to that's when they reach out actually to people who do my work. They start reaching out for help. Or unfortunately, some people turn to like alcohol or food or completely shut down because they don't know what to do for themselves. So grief is not, it doesn't know an end date, doesn't know an end date. Grief
It's so
changes over.
important for people, like, this is the FitPro cod, Codcast podcast, and it's important for everyone working with human beings that have experienced loss. Number
Yeah.
one, to realize that it's not a thing that's like a storm that lasts for a period of time and then moves on. The
Mhm.
storm's ever in the background, and you have your stormy days continuously, and it lasts for a good while. Like we're talking, you're talking that we're talking the
Eight
months at
years
the
for
moment, and
me.
then there's the years, right? So
Mhm.
to know that that's what people are going through, and that they will still be affected, and we know that we feel our emotions in our physical body, otherwise we wouldn't be aware that we're feeling emotions. So it will affect, yes, it'll affect our physical performance, but it'll just affect the level of connection we might be having, that whole enjoyment piece. Exercise should be enjoyable, for example. The fact that they may not be the person that they were, or they may be the person that they were only by putting that on as a superficial, a facade, a mask. And we need
Mhm.
to be aware that asking real questions, maybe at the end of the session when it's okay for them to show emotion and things like that, are really, really important. So for me, just knowing this about human beings helps us be better coaches. That's number one. But number two, the thing that is so fascinating is this secondary loss thing that you've already alluded to, and we're going to kind of dive into now, because I think a lot of people define some of the things that they're experiencing as loss, as grief, as stress. And you
Mm-hmm.
described, okay, then you've got this diagnosis with your husband. Kennedy's disease, by the way, for everyone listening, they might know it as motor neuron disease, something along those lines. Lou Gehrig's disease, I think, is another term for it as well.
It looks like, yeah, it looks like
Yeah.
Lou Gehrig's.
And
It looks similar to it, but people live longer with it, but it
yeah.
acts the same. Yeah.
So you've got, let's just take that as an example. You have the initial hit. Now you're not grieving the loss of a person, but you are still in grief because you're losing the relationship as it was. It changes. You're then grieving the loss of all the things that might have been, or all the things that already were and are no longer like that. So there's all these other categories of grief that are so obvious, and yet we we don't define them that way until they're held up in front of our face and going, I recently injured my leg. I've been in a boot for 2.5 months, right? I went through a stage of grief of the things that I couldn't do that I used to be able to do. I went through this thing, right? And it was rotten, but I could recognize it because we'd had these conversations about grief. And I'm like, oh, I'm grieving the loss of things that the life that I would have been living. And once you can recognize that, it really helps you process and become in the present. I'll shut up talking now because I've got you on here to talk about all of that. So, talk to us about the types of things that are secondary grief, and by all means, use your own life as the example.
Yeah, well, and you know what, you just reminded me of a conversation my husband and I had. You speaking of your leg and the things that you've recognized that you've lost. And when I was going through my back pain, and I said I'm not going to have surgery, he said you have to have the surgery. Like I can't see you go through this. And I said nobody's going to do surgery on me. I don't have pain. I really don't want to mess with my back. It was the last resort. And I said, maybe God put this in my life to see what it's like to be you, to sit here for 2 years and see everybody doing what I love and I can't. I would go to the gym and I would leave in tears because it just hurt to walk the track. I couldn't do anything else except I just wanted to go in and walk the track. And I remember one day, it was the day I finally said, I can't do this anymore. I went and I sat on the bench in the lobby of the rec center that I go to, and I just sat and cried. And I thought, this is going to be my life. Who's going to take care of Chris? So it was huge grief, but it opened my eyes to his world. It definitely made me more empathetic and understanding, and to listen to him in ways that I could encourage him to keep moving. And so when someone comes into a clinic or to a gym and they're saying they got this issue with their back or their leg, and they had to have a surgery and they're not able to do certain things they did anymore, they're grieving what they used to be able to do. So with the secondary losses, well, there's quiet sorrows and there's secondary losses, and they're kind of, I don't know. We'll talk about the secondary losses. So the secondary losses would come from things like, now my husband has to be on disability because he can't work like he used to. So that's a loss of income. That's a secondary loss for me. Losses like we can't go hiking anymore. All the things that brought us together within 5 to 7 years they were taken from our life. That's a quiet sorrow. That's something I hold deep in my heart. That's something people don't recognize. They just see me happy, healthy. They think I go out and do absolutely everything I do. I mean, that I love. No, I watch other people live the life I dream of. That's a secondary loss, the loss of dreams of having more children. So it's a quiet sorrow, but it's also a secondary loss, that loss of dreams of what you think life is going to be. And when someone loses a spouse or maybe a sibling or maybe their last parent and they're an only child, there's so many different types of losses that we experience, relational connections that we have, that the secondary losses revolve around that. So if you're an only child, I did an interview on this several years ago, um, like the orphaned adult. You're an only child and you've lost both of your parents. That only child now has nobody to go to. You've lost a piece of your history. You have nobody to share the memories of Christmas or Easter or that vacation. Remember? No, because there was nobody there but you and your parents, unless you took a friend along, right? Say you lose your spouse. Your spouse is different than the loss of a parent because your spouse is your future. You expect to leave your home, marry your spouse, start a family, grow old together. But when I had a girl, honest to God, when you're 26 and your husband calls you to go to lunch and you say, no, I have work to do, and he instead goes for a run and never comes back because he has a heart attack on his run at 26 years old. How do you cope with that? 26 years old. Yes, you have your whole life ahead of you, but you've only been married for 2 years. What's
Yeah.
next? How do you deal with those things? So, she lost her future. She lost an income, right? And then you have some of the older people who, in their 50s and 60s, they might lose a spouse. And then all of a sudden they have to go and find a job, or they have to um, sell their house and move because they can't afford to live where they're living. Those are secondary losses, that sense of security. And then when we look at all the parts of how we're affected in grief, the pies, the physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and social, there's the spiritual loss that might take place. And that could be that somebody loses their faith. I thought I believed in God, but he didn't answer my prayers. Why did this happen to me? I did that. Why did this happen to me? I did all the right things. Why was my husband diagnosed with this disease? You
Yeah.
know, why me? Why do I have to give up everything I love? What about these other people? Why can't I have any more kids? So we start these conversations with God or whoever we believe in our higher, as a higher power. Somebody's got to give me an answer. And the problem is there isn't. And the only thing I can say to people is through this, and I don't say this anytime soon in my conversations, but as time goes on closer to the year, I'll say, tell me how you've grown. How have you grown? So that they could see the growth within themselves in the last year. Maybe they're not crying every day. Maybe they're able to go out and come back home and not break down, because going to the gym and being with friends, that's a great community, right? Great sense of community. But then they come home to an empty house if they've lost their spouse. So going back to secondary losses, sorry if I'm getting confusing. Does this make sense to you?
Oh, keep going.
So sense of community. Say you go to the gym every day. You and your spouse go to the gym every day. You do your workouts together, and then your spouse dies. How do you go back to that gym? How do you face that gym every day? And some people will go back very willingly because that's where they know that's where the support is. And some are like, I just can't go to that place. But that place is a place of community. So if they stop going, they've lost that community support. Or maybe they belong to a choir, or or a book club, or there's a lot of people who play cards together. But when their spouse dies, they feel out of place. They don't feel like they can go. So they pull away, and they lose their sense of community. Then you have people like me who lost their mom. Talk about a sense of community. I had a very tight group of women that I hung around with, and they weren't there for me. And I think they thought I had it all together because I do this for a living. But until you go through something, you just don't know. And it took me a while to give that grace to say, they just don't get it. I can't be upset. I can't be hurt. They just don't know. It's like nobody knows what it's like to live with Kennedy's disease. They would see my husband when he was younger, and being able, he would stand and he could walk and then he'd use a cane. And I'd be on the roof and trimming branches. I had a chainsaw. It's like, just watch out. I had my chainsaw chopping down trees. Nobody ever stopped to ask me if I needed help. And I
Yeah.
would be saying, oh, he can't do these things. That was a loss to him, being able to chop down a tree for me, you know?
I was thinking about the secondary losses for your husband are just immense. So,
Yes.
to
Very isolated today.
grieve the life that he had, grieve all the
Mhm.
things that he could do, and then all the things that might have been. I mean, that's I can't imagine. I mean, I'm sure people will write in and tell us, but it's almost I can't imagine a more significant ongoing grief than dealing with
Mhm.
something that way, because you have to wake up to it every day. I it got me thinking about people who uh have an accident and then are wheelchair bound, for example, but were fully able-bodied beforehand, and that whole, okay, now I'm going to get up and be in a chair from now on,
Mhm.
and things like that, those big changes. But you're not gone. You have to live with this new existence, which is different from an old existence, and an existence that you will mourn. And then
Yes.
it gives you such admiration. Like it's almost like everyone who's gone through that and they're making their way in the world, hugely inspiring to the point of tears when I think about that. Just by being in the world and get continuing, right, continuing with life. Because I don't think I don't think any of us really truly can put ourselves in that position unless we take time and just imagine every minute of every day and go,
Right.
this is how it would be now, which is
Right.
obviously true empathy, which we're talking about here. Really is this whole session really is about understand this from this point of view so that you can dial up your empathy and be more aware of those people experiencing grief, even if they haven't lost someone as well. Now, you sent me a thing. I'm just going to put it on the screen. For those who are listening to this, don't worry, I will describe it. But I just want to bring it up onto the screen because you sent us this thing, which actually is about secondary losses and grief. And in the center, we've got this circle. This is primary loss or person who died, but actually it's event that creates bereavement, isn't it? Like, you can have a loss of a friendship, right? That person is still in the world, but a loss of a friendship, or a relationship of any kind, that's
Mhm.
a massive grieving process that people can go through. But then we've got the secondary losses on the outside: loss of income, loss of identity. I mean, that in itself is huge. Loss of dreams for the future, loss of faith, loss of confidence, loss of financial security, loss of support system. Because with a person, normally other people drift away with that person as well. But I look at
Mhm.
that, but that whole
Yeah.
identity and dreams for the future, that for me, I mean, that'll be universal during grief, whatever the event is that creates the grief in the first place. You are no longer you,
Right.
and you no longer go forward in life in the way that you thought you would be. Now,
You
I
have to
like an
redefine
unpredictable
yourself.
future, don't get me wrong, but my unpredictable future, there's still a lot that can be predicted about it. Like, that's the thing. None of us know what's going to happen tomorrow and etc. But there are a number of things in place in my life that it's likely that are going to continue. You living with your family. You're people are gonna, my kids are gonna grow older, and school is gonna happen, and do you know what I mean? Jobs and things like that. There's gonna be things that go on for me that are sort of expected. When that's all swept away and going, okay, then nothing is certain.
Right.
And who are you anyway without that person, or without that event? Uh, that's it's it shakes you through your entire being. Those people are coming to exercise classes, and
Yeah.
coming to personal training sessions, and coming in for nutritional advice, and coming in for, massages and things like that. They're the people that we're dealing with every day. And the reason I say that is because of the secondary loss element. So,
Mhm.
probably half the people that we're dealing with each day are dealing with a grief, a loss of some kind, aren't they?
Yeah, they could be dealing with the loss of a job, the loss of a friendship, but they're changing health. Maybe they're, like you said, suddenly you can't do the things that you used to be able to do. So, how do you focus on the things you can do? My husband, for example, cross country skiing, we biked every single day, every weekend was 50, 60 miles, every Friday or Saturday and Sunday. We would travel and our bikes were always on the car. So now what he does is he goes in the pool and he has to use a chair to get into the pool. And the chair has to be all the way down because he has to be able to hold on to something to kind of stand up, but he's still moving. We went to therapy. He has tools that he uses in the pool so he can keep his body moving. So it's fine. And I think it's a difference because his brothers don't do these things. So it does make a difference when you have somebody around you who understands that this is a loss for you, right?
Yeah.
We're going to keep you moving the best way we can because not everybody has what he has in me and what I have in him. I went to Australia for a month because he's like, yeah, you need to go and do this. And I'm like, you need to go to the pool every day because now we don't go every day, 3 days a week, whatever, if we can. But you see how his activity level changed. He had to get to a point of acceptance to be able to go to the pool and say, this is the exercise I can do to move my body. This is where I'm the freest because I can stand in the water. I can kick my legs. I don't have the pressure of the gravity of the chair and my bed. Those are the two places I can be. So when we listen to people with their limitations, when they come in, I love working with people who are challenged that way. I
Mm.
mean, I think I kind of shoot for the underdog when I look at people. I've recently started something where I working with the employees and working on mobility and strength and teaching them about their own bodies. And they're like, "Wow, I never even knew how to do these things. I didn't realize how out of shape I am. You know how much easier my job is now that I've been doing these workouts with you?" So when we look at something and we can identify, we're only as strong as our weakest link, right? So if we find a way to focus on that weakest link and make it their greatest strength, that's good. That's going to give them the confidence that they lost because of this disability or because of the grief that they experienced in the death of the person or the loss of their job, because confidence is huge, huge for people who have gone through grief. Again, depending on that relationship. So the more we can focus on and identify, like, what's that weakest link, not necessarily to focus on it, and keep pounding it in, but okay, how do we work around that? And how do we make this a strength? That's where I think we need to work.
I think what just came to me while you were talking there is, like, we've been talking about grief, loss, this kind of loss, something taken,
Yeah.
away from you. But movement is how we give. It's one of the ways that we give, isn't it? It's one of the ways we
Yeah.
give to ourselves, a give to a person, give to a being. Movement
Mhm.
gives you so much because, it's well documented. I don't really need to go through the science on, you know, great hormones that are released during exercise. Obviously, it's going to change our mental and physical state. But that act of giving to yourself, but but then the resulting physical change and physical feelings that you get increase feelings of capability, self-esteem, confidence. That's the real good stuff that we want for those people, because I don't think at that point in time they care what their biceps look like. What they want is to feel better. And this is the way that we can give to people, to connect them into that, even if they weren't really big movers before. Somehow they're getting something new. Those people that did move before, they're hanging on to something that is familiar, but it's the feelings, isn't it? It's the state of you that
State self.
exercise, that just moving in general, activity, we don't want to really call it exercise, but activity really delivers.
I always tell, well, gosh, there's so many things I have to say about that. One is I always say, don't think about how you feel going in, think about how you feel going out. How do you feel after a workout? How do you feel after exercise? Yeah, you might be tired, but don't you feel good? You just took care of yourself. And most people will be like, I feel so great after I do that. So I always say, don't think about how you feel going in, think about how you feel coming out. That's what I would tell myself on the days I drag myself home after work. And just having a way to express that, like one of the parts of grief physically is that we have this, we could either close in and get real tight and make ourselves real small, because grief draws us inward to our heart center, right? And that's all that we can manage to do, is to function. Our heart beats, thank God, by itself, because we don't have to think about that. Our digestion, our lungs and digestion, all of that works, but on its own. But we get real tense and we get real physical, and we hold it in our shoulders, or we hold it in our low back, right? Or we hold it in our legs. And then we end up, getting hurt because we're trying to do something that's too big. But if we walk into a place where somebody understands that we're going through grief, and not only do we have a job sitting all day, but we're going through grief and maybe holding on to this physically, how do we open that up? How do we open ourselves up? I'll do that in my group and have everybody just take a nice deep breath and spread their arms. And sometimes I do a tree imagery, and they talk about how much better they feel to open up their chest and to look up to the sky, close their eyes, take a deep breath, because they don't do that. Because we don't even think to do that when we're grieving. All we're thinking is, how do I get through the day? And like, in your group, in your class, Brain Body Essentials, one of the things that was mentioned in there is that, the most expensive things the brain can do is learn something new and move. And when you're grieving, everything is new, everything is foreign. So we want to stick to things that are kind of familiar. And if movement is something familiar, we got to, encourage people to stay with that. Even before I became a personal trainer, being a personal trainer never crossed my mind. But for years, I mean, I've been at hospice almost 25 years doing this work. And I always said, no matter what you do, make sure you move every single day. If it means going out and walking down your driveway, what do you guys call a driveway? A park? What do you call it?
Driveway works. We know what that is.
Driveway. Okay. Go for a walk down your driveway and back in the house. Get some kind of exercise and move your body. So we don't think of moving when we're in this state. Then
Yeah.
you have the people who are just, they have to go, they have to go, they can't sit still, their anxiety is so high and they can't focus. So exercise would be good for getting them out and getting rid of their wiggles. But there's also the piece of grief that is the anxiety piece that is, and a lot of people deal with anxiety and grief. And when you're anxious, as I found out way too many times, it was even hard to walk around the block because I couldn't regulate my breathing. I was trying to move, but I would get so dizzy because I couldn't get my breath right because it was so short, you know? So being mindful of that when you're working with clients as well, that they can't always breathe right. And how do we help them regulate that breathing? And maybe it starts, with greeting them in the session with a check-in and maybe doing some deep breathing, just getting themselves balanced before we go on to something bigger. So,
There's a big message there, JoDee, that goes through everything. That is, you talked about being able to open up. We talked about just moving so that they just feel better. It doesn't matter what the movement is, really. Just, so don't get rigidly stuck to programs that you might be doing. If going for a walk and throwing a ball or a frisbee, or dancing in the rain, whatever it might be, is the thing that works to make them feel better in the movement of their body, that's great. But here's what they really need, and what comes through of everything you've said there is to open up. You need to feel safe in that you need to be a
huge.
safe space for those people, have a safe environment and be a safe space for those people, because then they are more likely to open up. They are more likely to just move and feel okay to move. That for me really comes through strongly in everything that you're talking about. Is
Mhm.
they can't be thinking about doing new things and trying to learn new stuff, and don't show them new exercises and stuff. Like, connect them with something, either maybe play from their childhood, or
Yeah.
something that's really familiar to them in a familiar environment with a familiar person, and that could be life changing for someone experiencing grief.
Yeah, absolutely. When I came back in 2020, when I came back from Australia from my trip, I started a group. And in that group, we had a woman whose house burned down, her mother died, her sister was diagnosed with cancer, and another one lost her daughter to a heroin overdose. In that group, those women knew, even though they didn't know each other, they knew each other through me. They felt a sense of safety where if they were in the middle of a workout and they started crying, they were like, we're all like, hey, man, it's okay, even though we were all virtual, right? But we did, we would check in with each other after every workout. And on Saturdays, we would have a support group. And so they felt supported because they knew there were people who weren't like in their immediate circle who were supportive of them. But absolutely, for me, and I think it's just the work I do in bereavement. And as a music therapist, gosh, way back, I learned about loss way back. Um, it's absolutely essential that they feel like they can trust you with what they're saying, that you provide a place for them to say, I'm having a hard time. Maybe you just give them a hug, or if they're a hugger, just let them know that you understand. If they want to talk about it, they can. And if they don't, you don't. I think one of the hardest things is someone will say something about their loss, and the person hearing it, the receiver, isn't comfortable with feelings. So they kind of cut it off. And I have friends who say, I don't do feelings. So, finding ways to address that, and maybe getting out of yourself and being a little more empathetic about the other person, and realizing it's not about you. They just needed somebody to say that to, and you don't need to fix it. You don't need to have an answer. You can simply say, this has got to be so hard for you. You know what? We're going to take today, we're going to do the best we can with our time together. You just let me know, if this is too much for you today, we'll pull back. You're in charge today. Give them some control, because when we've had a loss, we lose control. It's not our choice to break our leg in a million. No, you tore ligaments, don't you? It's not our choice to get a disease. It's not our choice to have someone die. So we want to control what we can. So giving someone control of their time with you is really important.
That's great. I mean, I'm just thinking back across our conversation. We've gone, okay, then we've said, like, you can have an awareness that grief
Mhm.
is actually more prevalent than you think because of secondary loss. Have that
Mhm.
awareness, dial up your empathy,
Mhm.
move in whatever way is right for them. Throw away the rule book, basically, or throw away the program, unless the program is their safe space. Find that out.
Mhm.
But just don't stick rigidly to what you think is the right thing to do based upon our feelings about what exercise is about. Mold to them. Do what they need in order to change their state on the inside. Be a
Yes.
safe space and create safe environments. All of those things are really, really valuable for people working with human beings. So then I think it would be remiss of me not to touch on a subject while I've got you. I mean, you've worked in hospice for that many years,
Mhm.
and I'm just interested to know, there's a lot of kind of, you know, regrets of the dying lists out there, and it's almost like a reality check for a lot of us sometimes when we think life is hard. But you've worked with those people, you've had end of life conversations with people. What are the themes that come up in end of life conversations? Because I know I remember you talking about forgiveness is a
Mhm.
theme amongst that. But what is in there?
Yeah, definitely forgiveness. I know we've talked about the book by Ira Byock called The Four Most Important Things. Oh my gosh, it just left me. um, Ira Byock, and it's "I forgive you, please forgive me, thank you, and I love you." And if you can say those things to someone, I mean, even in a relationship, it doesn't even have to be, in death. I mean,
Mm.
sometimes when we're working on forgiveness and trying to find some peace in a relationship, those are important things to say. I forgive you. Even if, they didn't do anything wrong, or please forgive me, even if you didn't do something, but um, so forgiveness is really important, and encouraging people to have conversations. It's not an easy thing to do. Sometimes we have family members who are, they're divorced families. There's a lot of discord in families. So trying to support the family that's present, and then how do we support the family that isn't present? Do they want support? We have what is called disenfranchised grief. So say there's a divorced couple. Um, and the ex-spouse wants to come in and say goodbye, well, or even go to a funeral. Like, why would you want to go? You're divorced. Well, that doesn't mean they don't care and they don't love them. You'd be amazed at the number of times I see an ex-spouse caring for the spouse that they divorced. They still have a respect for each other and are there for each other. You have situations where there might have been abuse in the past. There might have been physical abuse. There might have been alcoholism. How do you make peace with that past in the little time that you have? I remember walking in on a gentleman when I was practicing music therapy. I was an intern, and I walked in and he's like, "Wow, that's so beautiful. That's amazing. That's gorgeous." And he just went on. And I'm like, I did not realize at the moment, because I was a young student, was having a near death experience. I said, "Tell me more about this." So he told me, and I wrote a song. This is making me emotional. Um, and I brought it back to him and sang it for him, and he loved it. And he said, "Will you please sing that to my family?"
Oh,
And it was a song about him asking forgiveness. And his daughter said to me, she got angry and took me in the hallway and she said, "What was that all about?" And I said, "Well, that was your father's message. He asked me to give that to you." "Well, he was never there for me and he drank all the time and blah, blah," she just went on. And I said, "Well, now I understand what that song was about, because I have a different relationship with him. I saw a different side of your father, and he has really found peace, and he had this near death experience and realized what he had done wrong and what he had missed, and he wanted you to know." That man died 2 days later. So we get these situations that come up for people. Um, you never know what's next. Sometimes people have visions, but we try to get the families to connect. There's always a lot of anxiety and anticipatory grief. So, anticipatory grief is while you're sitting there and you're like, I remember watching my father in law. Nobody else knew, but I worked hospice. So I was counting every breath. I was checking periods of apnea. Like, oh gosh, how long is this going to be? Does he need more medication? And you just sit there on the edge of your seat sometimes just watching somebody. So, and then you're like, how is this going to play out? Am I going to be there? Do I want to be there? Is it going to be peaceful? Is it going to be rough? I mean, not all death is pretty. Let me tell you, it's not like what you see on TV. We
yeah.
have some bad things that happen. So it's preparing the family in that way and being a support to them, and keeping in mind with something you had just said about us coming in as movement specialists, right? And wanting to have our agenda, but listening to what the client needs. It's the same thing with our family. Always ask the question, whose need is it? Is it my need that you have this conversation with your father to fix things? Or is this what you want? Or is this what your father wants? Is it my need that you do this workout so you can get to your goals today? Or is this what you want and you ask me to push you? Right? Or is your need today to just kind of drop your weight and go for a walk, you know?
Right.
So it's always good to ask that question, no matter what we're doing, any conversation we have, even with a friend. Whose need is it that I bring up the subject that's hard? Who is it? Whose need is it that you know, ask them to explain themselves to me or whatever?
That's
So,
huge, but every session, let alone sessions where people may be experiencing something like that as well, experiencing some kind of grief or loss or bereavement. I mean, wow,
mhm,
whose need is it? That's a huge question. I feel like, sometimes people turn up and you can tell the coaches that it's their need to make sure they get through their program that day with that group, as
mhm,
opposed to just reading the room and going, all right,
mhm.
well then,
Read the room.
yeah, it's like for some people, like it might be that the first half of the session, they need to sit, talk, cry, curl up on the
Mhm.
floor, then come out of that and go, okay, then what should we do? Like just yeah, let it flow in a way. I think we can get very caught up in ticking boxes either on sheets of paper or in our heads, doing the thing that we plan to do, and just read the room and say, all right, what do they need? Not what do I need is a huge thing to leave the coaches with. So we're going to have to wrap up very soon, but I was just wondering if you had any final thoughts that you'd like to kind of give to us, really, which is it's almost like, how do you think we should help people, when it comes to this particular area?
Yeah. Well, again, grief comes in a lot of different packages, comes in a lot of different ways. And being a caregiver, as you said once when we were talking, like you sound like you're the voice of the caregiver. Pay attention to people in your lives who are caregivers because their energy level is at a very different place. And they need yoga, they need mindfulness, they need strength training, they need cardio stuff. They need that, but they also don't know how to take care of themselves. Um, it's a very big challenge. It's one of guilt that they live. If I do something for myself, that's selfish, instead of realizing that it's essential for them to do what they do. So whether they're a doctor, a nurse, a nurse's aide, or they're a personal caregiver in their life, encouraging that health and wellness and doing the check-in. When any of our clients come in, just check in with them. Check yourself first again and ask that question: whose need is it for today? Well, this isn't going the way I planned. So, check in with yourself and say, okay, whose need is this? Why am I getting frustrated with this? Okay, so we're just going to let that go and let this person take control. And just be mindful that everybody's got a burden on their heart. Everybody's got something. Maybe their dog is sick. I mean, grief goes down to our pets too. I have a friend that's grieving the death of their dog. Um, all of those things take a lot of energy. Grief takes a lot of energy from us. And so if somebody comes in kind of low energy, start slow, and oh, I forgot what the word is I wanted to use, but start slow and help them build up to their and to the energy level you hoped they would be at. Maybe do something like that. But just being mindful and being thoughtful that everybody's got something that they're carrying Everybody's got a burden, and we just all need to be gentle with each other, you know.
I think it's a good place to draw to a
Mhm.
close there, JoDee. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing so many powerful messages today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.